Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and as something of a departure from our usual schedule, I sort of felt to myself that just because I did the Chris and sections talk about his health and his body, that's not quite the full story, unfortunately, because there are several other factors that go into Chris's scathing problems with his health, and I feel like it would be a good way to communicate this a little bit further by actually going into step by step. And the reason why I'm actually wanting to do it this way is simply because one of these days, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to make the most comprehensive video about Chris that is probably sort of a little bit in the same way as like Sachumo and Down the Rabbit Hole, but it's going to be, if it's going to be that sort of thing, then it may as well be my own, if that makes sense. So this sort of covers like a lot of things, so let's get to it. Obesity. Health disclosure. This article contains in-depth discussion of Chris's physical and or mental health. This page is not to be construed as a substitute for legitimate medical advice or a professional diagnosis. All diagnoses are either taken from outside documentation or based on amateur analysis. One more thing, I am not overweight. Chris lying to a white knight. And well, yeah, it's kind of a little bit difficult to even think about starting this video by just first saying that, well, if we define obese or overweight, it means that somebody who has a body mass index that is larger than roughly 35 to as far as I think like Americans are concerned. I think it's roughly the same thing here in Britain. If your index is over 35, then you're qualified as overweight. And there's a lot of things that could contribute to this, a person's height relative to their actual weight. And it should be worth noting, actually, that, yes, even though Chris looks quite big, it also should be noted that Chris is at least 5'9" tall. So he's quite tall, which means he probably would weigh a little bit more than me, for example, who's only 5'5.5". But it also means that, well, Chris is actually carrying around quite a lot more fat, unfortunately. And for reasons we're about... Listen, I'm not going to say for even one instance that I'm the slimmest man in the world either. In fact, I'll just to prove I'm not a hypocrite, I'll just give you guys just a fun time, for example. Because for some reason, even like my boobs, for some reason, just seem a little bit more prominent. Like, even if I just turn to the side... Literally, on good days, I could just like walk around and just think that everything's fine and stuff like that. But again, after I've just had a meal, and I have had just had my evening meal anyway, so there is maybe a little bit leniency in that way. But there are other things, I do with my day. Sometimes when I'm not at work, sometimes I'll just try and get like a morning walk or something like that in, get some exercise in between, eating and working and stuff like that. For Chris, however, for what we're about to get into, you're about to see that Chris wouldn't and could not do either of these things, even if he wanted to. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I do not feel good about hearing remarks or comments that are relation to my gut. To Jackie. Obesity is perceived to be a worldwide epidemic, especially in the United States of America, with about 73.6% of adults overweight and 42.5% obese. The other 57.5% are just plain fat, or almost certainly have some. While Chris is no longer technically in the latter category, he spent a good chunk of his adult life in it, and he remains overweight to this day. Some people, and one case I do argue is that for every fat man, there is a thin man inside. Some may argue that there's probably a few of them inside Chris, but let's not get ahead of ourselves again. Chris seems to be in denial about his own obesity. His denial is evidenced by the fact that he portrays himself as a slim, barrel-chested hero. In his comics and in Christian Western Chandler's Future Message, where he describes himself as a fit as a fiddle. Furthermore, in his numerous dating profiles discovered by the trolls, he often lists himself as having an athletic build. Maybe if Chris was going to take up sumo wrestling, perhaps, but to be honest, even sumo wrestlers would point and laugh at Chris, because, to be fair, ladies and gentlemen, one thing you have to understand about sumo wrestlers is that you'll be very, very surprised about the sort of stamina those guys have, like a fat guy at a buffet. I don't even think Chris could even see himself doing that. At least I don't think so. What do you guys reckon? Or at the very least, having weight that is proportionate to his height. Yeah, exactly, as we discussed before. Another example of this was when he created a character for his comics named Sammy, whom Chris stated is based off him when he temporarily gained weight, became stupid, and went to watch television at Ghost Command. Even though he has always been this way, except, for the Ghost Command part, but that's a whole other problem. Further cementing his obesity, on the 2nd of October 2011, Chris's voluptuous man boobs won an award on manboobs.co.uk. That is a real thing that happened, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll even cite this because, of course, the Quickie would have this written down because, well, why not? No stone is going to be left unturned at this. If the website even still works. I mean, I know, again, what's the point of digging up an old reference from 13 years ago, but, guys, I promise you, this is important. It's even on the Wayback Machine, so probably the thing doesn't even exist, but yeah, there it is. He won current Man Boobs of the Month champion, so, yeah, exactly, as you might suspect. It's funny enough as well that even Chris seems to have these sorts of like stretch marks underneath his boobs as well. It's actually the sort of thing that's, well, to be honest, that happens when people build up a level of fat in their chest, is that unless it's actually like seen to, it can actually cause, like stress and tensions in your skin. If, for example, when you lose weight or you don't gain weight relative to this part of your body, to like your rib cage and stuff like that. During the jail saga, Chris notably shed a noticeable amount of weight, thanks to getting a degree of exercise while behind bars, and more importantly, his jail diet consisting of ostensibly healthier food than what he could get in the drive-thru, along with the amount of junk food that he could consume becoming limited by his commissionary funds. In May of 2022, Chris's mugshot, taken after returning to jail from Western State Hospital, shows that he has visibly lost some weight since his arrest in August of 2021, to the point where he no longer has a double chin. God, Chris really must have done like something. It must have really hit him hard if he was like that committed, or it was just the circumstances, as it were. Western State Hospital, unlike Central Virginia Regional Jail, does not have a commissary where he could supplement his jail diet with junk food and soft drinks. Then, of course, you would have to understand about who on earth would pay him to do that, but, that's besides the point again. The March 2023 mugshot seen on the release from jail also made it look like he had still lost substantial weight despite being able to add empty calories to his diet yet again, as his jail uniform looked incredibly baggy. From May 2023 onwards, Chris initially looked like he kept off some of that weight after he was spotted multiple times after leaving jail, meaning that he was still in some of the best shape in a long time despite presumably resuming his unhealthy eating habits. However, later sightings indicated that he has since ballooned back to his former weight, or at least one very near it, notably reaching a lot of fat underneath his neck. It is sort of said a little bit that actually you can gauge for a person's weight by seeing how thick their neck is, or among other things, but I don't know, I suppose, well, okay, I'm going to have to blur this out for 1 second, so in case you're wondering what I'm blurring out here is that this is that stupid gif of the crazy flying elephants, or whatever it's meant to be, of Chris just running naked, and believe you me, ladies and gentlemen, seeing Chris naked is something that nobody should ever have to do, so, and it's underneath the caption of Chris exercising. Chris believes that standing up without moving is a legitimate form of exercise. and as such considers playing Guitar Hero a workout. During one of his PSN chats with Julie, when asked to exercise more, he replied, "I'll stand up more." It is not known how Chris came to believe that standing up is an exercise, but it is most likely that Chris is simply extremely lazy and will lie to say that he works out every day, even though he just plays video games. It's possible he's picked it up from health tips that say standing burns more calories than sitting down, but rather than using such tips to get the most out of an already busy lifestyle, he substituted for actual exercise altogether. It's also entirely possible he's in such terrible shape that the simple act of standing tires him as much as an actual workout would tire a normal human being. You know, even though I don't have like a gym membership now and that, it's mostly due to the convenience of finding the time from work to be able to do it. I would still actually go out of my way, you know, to go for like walks or do something rudimentary, or at least do something to like even just get some fresh air or get some time away from the computer. Because again, we need a little bit of like of space away from these sorts of things, if that makes sense. Emily has said Chris power walks around his neighborhood for 30 minutes and claims it's 2 miles. I don't really think that's true, Chris. I have my doubts. Then claims to jog 2 or 3 minutes every walk. She then went on to say Chris doesn't know how to jog. His idea of jogging is actually sprinting. It's safe to say he tries to run at sonic speed for 10 seconds, then resumes his leisurely waddle. This theory is confirmed in Solitude's Edge. I suppose the video for Solitude's Edge is probably still in existence. There's no real reason why it is. Chris tried to do what he calls parquet, which is just parkour. An artist description... oh dear. Okay, so... here it is. This is the actual video of Chris trying to do what he calls parkour. Or, well...
Hello there, fans.
We'll just check this out.
Here live at the downtown mall, where for the Science Show franchise from the state of Quickville and everything like that, I'm going to do a parquet from this point all the way down to the parking garage, where at the end we will get a nice view of the tent-style theater that's down there where events are held. And for best viewing, the camera will be hung around my neck right about here, so you get to see what I see from that point of view. And also, there may be 1 or 2 pauses where I have to catch my breath. Of course, that's to expect, even from the...
Now, bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, Chris has never actually done parkour before, nor is Chris actually wearing clothing that even someone like Jeff Hardy would say looks a little bit out of touch with what he's trying to do. But for reasons you're about to see next... well, no amount of Gymshark clothing or like professional camera equipment for this said task could have saved Chris. So, let's just
best runner. All right, here we go.
I really don't have much else to say, ladies and gentlemen, because the entire video... if you were looking forward to seeing Chris try to do some parkour in this, or that there was going to be no jump cuts or levels of editing involved in this whatsoever, I am sorry to say, but the video is basically just this. There's no crazy stunts, there's no jumping between alleyways onto rooftops, there's no crazy flips, twists, turns. It's literally just Chris running. And listen, I don't quite know how best to put it, ladies and gentlemen, because listen, I'm not even going to suggest for 1 second I'm the best in shape for this either. You know what? It's outside of that and my problems with my lungs I've had for like since I was like 13. No, 12. Since 12. The most I could probably at least attempt to do this, but I'm not gonna lie, I would almost like be on the floor panting. But again, you know what? There are probably a lot of other people who would have done this, and I don't know why, but it doesn't even look as if Chris is running very fast either. I don't know if it's just to compensate for balancing the camera around his neck, but I will say, however, give Chris some credit. It's not really parkour. It's not really jogging or running or nothing like that. It's, well, Chris is still running, I suppose. He's getting some exercise, I suppose. But again, it's also the fact that, for reasons we'll get into, if Chris ever was going to do this regularly, and considering his diet, they simply would not have worked together. Which is just, well, yeah, okay, I'm done watching that. That's all you really need to know. In Mailbag 21, Chris claimed that he planned on investing in a gym membership. Judging by photographs and videos featuring his midsection from subsequent months, he either lied or wasted his money, only finally doing it almost 10 years later. And to varying degrees, of success, I suppose. In his letter to Radio Rabbit Zero, he mentioned playing basketball to pass the time while awaiting court hearings. Diet. Another contribution to Chris's obesity is the food he eats, which, again, I might make a bit of a more generalized thing when we're talking about the very diet Chris lives on anyway, but I'll get to that in a second. Chris's diet is appalling. Yes, consisting mainly of fast food and other unhealthy foodstuffs. While it would be acceptable if he treated himself to that stuff occasionally, like most people do, there's no question that it's a staple of his actual diet. The sheer amount of calories he consumes, coupled with his laziness, means that he's carrying around extra mass to make another person. His diet will mostly likely also cause problems other than obesity, and may be the cause of his fecal leakage. In 2017, Chris decided that his ass wasn't fat enough, and began listening to a subliminal hypnosis track in the hopes of transferring his belly fat to his ass, as an attempt to obtain an hourglass figure, as opposed to, doing what other people would do in the scenario and substitute their diets for things that actually would produce more fat in other parts of their body, or even bothering to do any semblance of exercise at all by actual professionals. Or not even professionals, but even those who've proven that they can make it work. During the jail saga, Chris's diet consisted of the type of slop typically served in jail cafeterias, and occasionally commissary food if he'd earned it. It is unclear if Chris was a picky eater, but he shed a noticeable amount of weight during his extended stay in jail, likely due to a significant decrease in junk food available for him to consume. Post-jail sightings would see Chris quickly shedding his jailhouse physique, and by August of 2023, he would appear to be back to his normal state of obesity. Obviously, literally, it didn't seem to impact the entire. Well, to be honest, the entire jail saga didn't really have any impact on Chris, whatsoever. It would seem. Now, the only thing I kind of wanted to bring up next, I suppose, is let me just do one quick thing here. Now, it must be honest, ladies and gentlemen, that whilst I talk about Chris's dieting, there's also a very small tangent I actually do want to make about this, and that is, would it not be better off if Chris, even if he wasn't going to take up exercise, would it not be better off if he simply reverted or substituted his propensity for McDonald's and KFC and Burger King to a diet that consisted, of fresh fruit and brown bread? Well, yes, of course it would. But the point is that no, ordinary person in Chris's situation, let alone Chris himself, is ever going to do such a thing. And the peculiar evil is this, is that the less money you have, the less you actually feel inclined to spend it on dull, wholesome food. And it's for this reason, is that when you're like Chris, which means to say when you are unemployed, which means that you are poor, starved, harassed, bored and miserable, you don't want to spend your time, having dull, wholesome foods. You want something that's a little bit tasty. Because you know what? Chris's life, as miserable as it is, by all accounts, is it not right and just for Chris to enjoy whatever pleasures he can get out of life? Now, with that being said, there's a propensity to say that maybe Chris's issue is not so much obesity, but it is by greed and gluttony. Because, as shown by the hundreds of video games that he owns, he's not particularly short of entertaining himself, and he's not particularly, short of finding ways to spend his days and stuff like that, unemployed, although he does have some skills that are actually quite beneficial to the real world. However, for reasons we're probably about to see as well, it becomes increasingly apparent where Chris's priorities actually lie. Because if Chris had any priorities to actually find work at all, or to even make solitude work properly, he would have answered these things a very long time ago. I know that, and you know that, so I just felt the need to put this in here. Moving on. Actual weight gains. Seriously though, the last few times I looked on the smart scale at how much I weighed, without clothes, at above 210. I hopped off immediately without letting it sync with my Fitbit app. ALOL. ALOL. I don't know what ALOL actually means. Actually laughing out loud, I suppose. I don't exactly have any info 5 years later about what Chris actually weighs today. But for reference, ladies and gentlemen, the last time I weighed myself, 14 stone 2.5, which I think is roughly, let me just, actually I'll tell you what, I'll find out, hold on 1 second, which is the equivalent of, it's equivalent to roughly basically 199 pounds, so I'm not going to say that, again, I'm necessarily the best counterpart to this sort of thing, but I don't know, I think being under 200 pounds is, perfectly fine, mostly because, again, considering I'm quite a bit shorter than Chris, it may as well be, so I don't know, you be the judge about it. Do some of us have, room to complain about this when we talk about Chris's health and stuff like that? I'm not too sure. Modern measurement of whether someone is overweight or obese generally employs the BMI system, which creates an index based on the height and weight of an individual. This system is by no means perfect. The readings tend to be inaccurately high for people who are exceptionally tall, have heavily set bodies, or are very muscular, because these people have more bone or muscle weight than others. Yeah, the averages are very, very different. However, it is a very accurate system when applied to people of average height, bone structure, and muscle build, which Chris is. Additionally, this distinction between overweightness and obesity is arbitrary, with different countries using different standards. For our purposes, a BMI of 25 and above is overweight, and a BMI of 30 and above is obese. Well, by that reckoning, I think I'd probably say I'm maybe in the 26 to 27 category, I suppose. Whether or not this is specifically for the US, I'll have to find out. Maybe I should go back to the gym again, actually, after thinking of stuff like that. I mean, I know the gym I used to go to is basically a rip-off, but then again, it has other benefits, because there's at least 2 gyms where I live that have their pros and cons. One is more expensive, but is open at later hours, making it more accessible. It opens late, it opens early in the morning, and is open till late. But it's, again, finding the time to do it, and then, having to fit in a day's work in between. Anyway, where were we? Which is the standard most widely used, in use in the US. If Chris were a Japanese citizen, he'd be obese with even a BMI of 25. Chris's height. One of two factors required to calculate BMI is height. For most of his adult life, Chris has claimed to be 5'10", which is 178 centimeters, which is possible, but even at this height, his BMI would have almost never been under the overweight bracket since he began to record it in 2000. Given how readily Chris lies to serve himself, he may be shorter, which would render his BMI in the obese range. In a police scanner report from 2014, he was described as being 5'9", and his custom Pokemon cards from 2000, 2002, and 2004 all gave his length as 5'9". As of 2021, Chris has taken 2, describing himself as 5'11", which is almost certainly a lie. It is possible he may have begun describing himself as 5'10" around the time the love quest began, as a way to look more attractive to women. Unfortunately for Chris, lying is not an attractive look. Too true. The earliest known reference to a 5'10" height appears to be on his Match.com profile, created circa 2006, as late as 2004. However, he listed his ideal height for a potential girlfriend as between 5 foot to 5'9", indicating that Chris may have still been describing himself as 5'9" by then. For the sake of simplicity, the BMI data listed below is based on a height of 5'10". Now, with this being said, however, this is a graph that Chris's reported weight over the years. So, from 2005, when Chris would have been only 23 years of age, he would have been roughly 180 pounds. And as we see here, that the heaviest he was early 2012, when he reached 101 kilos in weight. So basically, 16 stone was probably the heaviest Chris ever actually weighed. So that's actually very, very interesting, because for reference, ladies and gentlemen, the most I ever weighed at one point in my life was actually 16 stone 4, which would have made me fatter than Chris at one point, but that was at least 3 years ago, and it's sort of dropped a little bit more to somewhere roughly just a little bit below, so it would have been a little bit more down here, which is not bad on balance, I suppose. Weight claims. 9th of May 2000. He gave his weight as being 185 pounds or 80 kilos. This would give him a BMI of 26.5, which is only slightly overweight. 25th of March 2002. Chris's Dark Christian custom Pokemon cards gave his weight as 185 pounds. 2nd of February 2004, Chris's Pokemon cards gave his weight as 165 pounds. The least he has claimed to weigh in his adult life, if this number is accurate, his BMI at the time would have been 23.7, putting him within the heavier end of the normal range and not overweight. However, since this is the first time Chris has reported his weight since the beginning of his love quest, it is possible that he still weighed closer to 185 pounds and simply began lying about his weight to appear more attractive to the opposite sex. 20th of July 2005. In a diary entry, Chris reported that his weight was 180 pounds, meaning that during that time his BMI was 25.8, which is slightly overweight. Fall 2009. Chris told Casey that his weight was somewhere between 215 and 220, so that's quite a jump, so it's like 30.8 to 31.6. Then later, in a later conversation, he said he was 205 pounds, so down from 216 when the last time he had been there. February 2010, Chris claimed to weigh about 200 pounds, but even if we were to interpret about 200 to mean 190, his BMI would still have been 27.3, overweight nearing obesity. He also claimed at this time that this goal was to get to 180 pounds. October 2010. In the weigh-in video, Chris claimed to weigh 216 pounds. This seems very unrealistic given his apparent girth and food consumption. Most experts believe that Chris either offset his scale by 40 or 50 pounds, or that he did not fully stand on the scale in order to fool people into believing he's not extremely fat. It is also possible that Chris's years of inactivity had caused his muscles to deteriorate to the point that he looked like he weighed more than 250 pounds. Anyway, it would have been at least 31 on the BMI scale, making him obese. April 2012, Chris announced on Facebook that he was going down to 223 and falling. July 2013, he was down to 220. So he managed to lose basically the equivalent of about 3 pounds in 14 months. 15 months for that matter. October 2013, just 3 months later, he apparently weighed at 211. And he had lost 7 more pounds since he checked. In January of 2014, he claimed to be 202 pounds. While many would be quick to dismiss this solely on the basis that he eats at McDonald's regularly, at least one report shows that it can't be the sole factor, due to one individual actually losing weight on a pure McDonald's diet. However, given the sheer deluge of fast processed food Chris eats from other places, the non-existence of an exercise regime, and the simple fact that his face is a lot fatter compared to previous photographs of him, this claim that he weighs 202 pounds is very dubious. October 2014. Chris defensively told his friend Shayna that he weighed around 200 pounds. 4 years later, he was 212 pounds of awesome. January of 2019. By the way, also, he was also congratulating somebody just on their strength. He was 213 pounds. And by November, he was 203 pounds. And finally, of January of 2024, he was claiming to be 215 pounds. So the most you need to know really about this is Chris jumped back and forth for like years between probably symptoms of depression as well as just not feeling. And also, by the way, this is Chris when he was like photographed in jail, and just you can tell already that Chris, like, Chris actually looks quite a lot healthier here than he probably ever did for many, many years. I mean, his clothes fretted his body. It frets Chris's body. You can tell obviously where he's like lost weight, and also his neck it has a much longer neck, and it even makes as though his hair looks a little bit thicker back then. So if you ever needed a little bit of extra inspiration about why losing some weight here and there might actually be a pretty good thing, all things considered, there you go. Health. Obviously, all this has as an adverse effect on Chris's health, which we did cover previously. Morbidly obese people are far likely to develop diabetes, heart disease, and a number of other ailments. While it is adamantly possible to be both fat and thin at the same time, and an obese person can be very healthy in other regards, even living a long life, Chris's lifestyle, combined with ample evidence of his lack of physical prowess, means that this does not apply to him. And finally, denial. I'm pretty sure there's a little bit more to it, so here we go. Denial. He's fat. I'm thin. Chris breaking out into chorus over Alec Benson Leary, even though Chris was led to believe that it was the YouTuber Fat Man was the one who was actually Alec Benson Leary. You know, Aussie Dorsey. You know, that guy. Chris has genuinely been in denial about his weight. When a white knight once told him that he needed to lose some weight if he ever wanted to get a girlfriend, Chris responded by freaking out and exclaiming that he wasn't overweight. In an IRC chat, Chris has been known to become very defensive about his weight, always making claims that he works out, when in fact he just stands up while playing Guitar Hero. Chris's reaction to being called fat is precisely the same as his reaction to being called gay. Unfortunately for Chris, there isn't a poster that will help him lose weight. He simply screams that he isn't fat, then oftentimes lies, and calls the person accusing him fat. He exhibited this behavior during an email with Evan, during his phone call with Casey's father, and especially in his conversation with Casey and Liquid Chris, where insults about his weight triggered a screaming rage. However, during his original rivalry with Liquid Chris, Chris once finally admitted he was perhaps maybe just a little bit fat, but only because he could use this as proof that he was the real Christian Weston Chandler. And what good did that ever do you, Chris, to be the real Christian Weston Chandler? A similar problem arose during the Asperchew saga, where Chris, in an attempt to prove that Asperchew was a parody of himself, was forced to admit that Asperchew's Buddha belly and man boobs are similar to his own. More specifically, he acts as though he used to have a sagging gut, even though he has, in fact, significantly gained weight since high school. He chose to focus on this aspect of Asperchew rather than admit his more embarrassing failures, the series parodies. He did once admit in a phone call with Jack Thaddeus that he was not fit. There is also convincing evidence that Chris has difficulty recognizing the human figure, faces in particular. His consistent representation of himself as slender and athletic may be attributable to his having formed his self-image during high school, when he would spend hours studying his then scrawnier self in the mirror, memorizing his looks. However, this is unlikely, as Chris has probably never spent hours studying anything. And we went over some of his reports, so we could say that, yes, actually, that there are issues with this claim. Chris passed a kidney stone on July 9th, 2017. According to the Mayo Clinic, some causes of kidney stones include dehydration, certain diets that are rich in protein, sodium, and sugar, and being obese, which makes sense seeing as Chris is fat, eats a lot of fast food, which is rich in sodium and sugar, and he commonly drinks soda over water, which, unlike water, doesn't do well for hydration. And the only other thing to notice that in the comic is the fact that, well, similar to villains like Robotnik or the Jerk Chief and comic relief like Sammy, but Sonichu 12 contains a bizarre sequence in which Rosechu and Sarah balloon up after losing 200 pounds in 2 weeks. This was done to appeal to Jessica Quinn, who at the time had a fat fetish. The only other things I suppose worth noting right now is the fact that there are some other things that Chris is like, he would rather spend his money on, and this could, well, basically give you a better insight as to the sorts of lists of places that Chris goes to eat. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is basically it. And as you can see right here, we're sort of doing a little bit more of a larger overview of Chris's actual health a little bit going forward for the next couple of weeks. And obviously some of these are going to have to be in their own spliced together, because there's a lot of things to go into. And I hope you guys are going to enjoy this little mini series, and I cannot wait to sort of all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.